Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're so excited to have you. We're going to get started in just a few minutes here, as said. In the meantime, chill out to these fun jams. Give it just one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. Alrighty, everybody, welcome and good afternoon to everyone, or evening or morning, wherever you're joining us in the world here. My name is Nick Quinlan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Major League Hacking, and I am joined here by some amazing panelists. I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a minute, but as you can see, we have Adam Duvander and Juan Pablo Flores here, and my colleague Fiona Whittington as well. Thank you once again for joining us. This is our opportunity today to talk about developer marketing. As Major League Hacking, we've done a lot of developer marketing. Major League Hacking is one of the largest developer communities in the entire world, and we work with an incredible number of developers. 1 in 3 new web programmer or new programmers in the United States today comes through our events every single year. And that gives us lots of opportunities to see many different developer marketing strategies and talk with lots of incredible people. And we wanted to give you all an opportunity to hear more. And so we've started this series of webinars to do just that, talking about a variety of topics. This is our second one, and we hope to have you joining us for this and many more. So if this is useful for you, please let us know what else you'd like to learn, and we'll make sure that we're putting together topics that make sense for you. But today, the topic that we're going to be talking about is marketing your product to student developers. Now, to give you a little bit of background on myself, I am obviously the COO of Major League Hacking. But before that, I worked at SendGrid for a number of years as developer evangelist. And one of the things that I saw firsthand was how difficult it was to prove student value, well, understanding that there was a lot of value being created there. Going on to Major League Hacking, I started seeing that in many, many more ways. Because MLH works with so many students, we got to start seeing more about how students work with technologies and what they go on to do with it. Given our scale, we've been able to figure out that somewhere around about 40% of students who interact with the technology at an event in their career as a student goes on to introduce that into a production environment at work. So this can be an incredibly powerful marketing channel for you as marketers, as developer evangelists, or whatever you do in your own organizations. So we wanted to bring a little bit of that knowledge to you. And I'm joined today by two people who absolutely have a lot of that knowledge. First up, I want to bring up Juan Pablo, who is a senior program manager at GitHub. Juan Pablo, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you for such an intro. Hey everyone, my name is Juan Pablo. People on the tech streets call me Juanpa, and I'm, as Nick mentioned, a program manager here at the education team. A lot of the work that I do is to create, maintain, nurture our student developer programs. That goes from the hopefully very well-known GitHub Campus Experts, our kind of like student super fun program where we have some of the most awesome students across the world. And recently I took over our new program that is GitHub Internships, where we try to connect students with professional development opportunities in both open source and software engineering companies. Yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited for everything you have to bring. I've been working alongside you for a number of years and know that you have such an incredible depth of knowledge and ability to work with students in some really unique ways. So I can't wait for you to share that. Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, so Adam Duvander, I'm the founder of Every Developer. We work with technical companies with technical products that want to reach those audiences. So household names that you've heard, and ones that we're working hard to help make household names also. In the past, I was a journalist, a developer, and then went kind of at the time to the provider side, I called it, and worked with Nick and others on this call at SendGrid, and then have been in a couple of different marketing roles, but I call myself an accidental marketer, and wrote a book that says developer marketing does not exist. So I'm sorry, Nick, that you mentioned MLH does a lot of developer marketing. I'm sorry it doesn't exist, so you can't. In terms of student developers, certainly along the way at Programmable Web and SendGrid and Zapier, I worked with student developers, and a lot of our clients are trying to figure out where's the right persona, how broad should they go. So we work a lot with them there, and then often are working with students as writers too. So yeah, there's a lot that we're going to dig into. And so thank you for having me, and looking forward to talking about it.
I am so excited to have you on this panel. I feel like every time I talk with Adam about developer marketing, which he claims doesn't exist, I'm surprised because I learned so much about it from him. He has two books that you should check out, one that just came out in the last month or so here. So go check that out on everydeveloper.com. And with that, I'm going to bring us right in to hearing a little bit more from each of you. Adam, why don't I start with you? You said that, you've worked with student developers in a whole bunch of different contexts. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those contexts, and particularly I might be interested in some of the work that you're doing with your clients, or maybe some of your previous organizations?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that comes up a lot as a fear that clients have for targeting student developers is that it's a really broad audience, and two, it's sort of how do we say that there'll be return on this investment as we go to someone who may not be working currently as an engineer, and when they get their first job, they might not have, they'll have a junior role, right? Potentially. And so that's one of the big questions that I know that we get, which is why I really love that stat. You mentioned at the beginning, the 40% stat. That's one I'll be referencing now. But I think it shows that there's a long game. And so, I mentioned the book, and what I mean by developer marketing does not exist is that it can't appear like marketing. And so really what Nick has heard me say in my years at SendGrid of share knowledge, not features. It's really about educating. And that's the way to reach any developer audience. And so I think the big thing that I try to educate clients is, if you think about that approach, that's going to connect with the student developers, who will then one day, at least 40% of them, push something to production that they learned when they were a student. And then it will also happen to be the best way to reach non-student developers as well.
Absolutely. I love that comment. I found so much when I target a student, I think about their needs, I end up thinking about many, many different developers' needs.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, you started talking about education. That's a great opportunity for me to ask Juan Pablo the same question. Juan Pablo, can you tell us a little bit about your role? You talked about it at the start, but tell us how you at GitHub work with students and all of the things that you do, because I think it's a pretty unique way that you go about doing that.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think one of the first things to know is that at GitHub, one of the biggest users that we have are students. They do contribute to a considerable number of monthly active users and monthly engaged users in the platform. So at that time, GitHub noticed that there was a very broad user base that we were not serving properly. And we also, I think at that time, they also learned that Git and GitHub are technologies that are not very easy to be learned. And I most likely would say the same thing about any developer technology, where we make a lot of assumptions of where people are coming from, what they know, what is the goals that they have on the platform. And what the GitHub education team was trying to find was kind of like, what's that balance between offering any tool and resources and experiences that students might need to have a successful career, but also making sure that we were serving to the very specific needs of this audience. I think as a program manager, we have a very crucial responsibility to design and implement student developer programs that prioritize the interests of both the students and the business. And it is fundamental that we are not just like benefiting one of the sides, which probably is like what you're talking about with the developer marketing book, where what we're trying to really do is to create programs that do not only are tailored to the immediate needs of the businesses or extreme short-term goals like monthly active users or how much engagement do you have, but for GitHub education, I think the real value that we have is that we have millions of students that are passionate developers, and they are looking to really get involved not only in software engineering but also in open source. But to truly create this scenario, we must strive to balance that enriches both like student journeys and prepares them to have a successful careers. As GitHub education, I think for us, it would be odd to say that we thrive as an organization if our audiences are not. So our success is inseparable from the success of students, teachers, and administrations from across the globe. So our job as part of the GitHub education team is making sure that all or as many students, teachers, and administrators are as successful as possible, and us providing kind of like a platform and the resources that they need to really flourish on GitHub.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like you mentioned, everything you do has to have that business case, and preparing students to have the successful career, educating them, giving resources to the people around students to do that obviously provides this long-term business value. But how do you actually recognize that at GitHub? How do you realize it? What are you measuring yourselves on to say this is the value?
That's a great discussion that I think has been fairly discussed, especially after the pandemic. In terms of like education-related resources and programs similar to what we have with Campus Experts, during the pandemic, we saw an increased number of requests for resources like the Student Developer Pack that gives access to students to tools, to the Campus Experts, where people wanted to continue learning, growing, and building communities. And for us, it was very challenging because we had gone from a few thousand applications to like tens of thousands. And I mean, Nick, I'm sure you have the same thing with the fellowship, where students were looking for like new ways in which they could learn and continue their education and they were just looking for anything that could be different. So I think for us, a big part of that was not only thinking of the normal metrics, again, like monthly active users, but we have developed a very intentional research on how do we measure community well-being. So for us, one of the core metrics and principles that we are experimenting right now is how are we measuring that our community is flourishing? How do we measure that people that get to GitHub are actually getting to the place that they want? And in tech, I think, especially for students, there is this sense of they see a lot of stuff on social media, like you see these big names, these open source maintainers, and a lot of folks join GitHub to have the same experiences or reach the same like status. And then they go to GitHub and then they are completely lost afterwards. And this is something that I call the Olympics paradigm, where you see people in the Olympics doing this incredible stuff and you're watching them on TV and you see people like applauding them. And you're like, I want to do something like that. But there's a lot of training and a process in order to get to that same point. And the goal with GitHub Education is to provide that. So for us, our measures go like in various multiple ways. Unfortunately, we are an organization. We have our own organization. So think about education as its own startup at GitHub, meaning that our metrics of success might be very different to, for example, an organization that lives on their product, that they might be more relatable to product feedback, or how are people implementing your technology, or marketing that could be very much measured on like new users, or how many people are reaching out a landing page, or even like engineering, which is like, how do we make the developer experience easier? So the fact is that we have a very privileged position, not only as GitHub that is a platform that serves all developers, but also within GitHub to be a platform that serves not only students, but essentially all learners.
I love that. That's awesome. And what I'm hearing from that too is that it sounds like as you educate these developers and make them help them get better and better and level up, they bring more and more value to GitHub as a platform because they're doing things like contributing to open source and something like that.
Yeah,
That's great. I'm going to turn now to Adam because he does a lot as well. I've seen him work with clients to truly help their developers level up a bunch. Adam, can you first speak to a couple of the techniques that you use to bring developers along that Olympics pathway that Juan Pa was talking about? And then two, tell us how you might do that differently for a student.
Yeah, and I love that comparison. And much like that, I can imagine there are track meets in my local town, right, where those athletes are being cheered on, just maybe not by the broad. So I think that analogy can go further to where there's excitement, even when you're not this like have this huge open source project that lots of people contribute to, right? Like I think that can go. Yeah, that's a fun analogy. The another thing, Juan Pa, that you said was about making assumptions about the audience, and I think even in my first answer, I kind of did, right? There's this kind of assumption that, oh, a student developer doesn't know as much as a professional developer, and that's one of the things I'm reminding my clients a lot of times is their core audience might not have all of they might not be in an organization that does all of the cool new things that maybe they think every engineering organization does. And so here you have students who are natively learning these tools, right? The idea of not using Git is not even in their imagination, right? And so Yeah, so I think that sort of assumption and being able to look at look at the student developers as some that might actually be coming into organizations and teaching some of these skills themselves is another cool way that you could look at that. So in terms of how we suggest our clients provide education for their technical users, the big one and really the reason why the title of the book is The Marketing Doesn't Exist is so often the mistake is made that it's very product focused. And so it's kind of all about the hype around the product, which is not a way to, like, for some technical audiences, it's really like it raises the skeptic flag and it's like you get the wall. But even in the best of cases, it's not the piece that's going to be exciting, right? Your product isn't the exciting thing. It's what you're going to do with it that's exciting. And so focusing your education around what are the outcomes that you're looking for? What are the use cases? How might someone be able to dive into this potentially over a really long weekend and build something new with it? Like that's the stuff that the sort of educate and inspire is kind of what we attempt to help our clients do.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Adam. I'm hearing both of you talk a lot about some of the values that come from student developers. You know, Juan Pablo, you're speaking about how student developers make up a large portion of the monthly active users on GitHub, and how they contribute to the overall health of your community. And Adam, you talked about how developers that come into organizations, because they've been immersed in a mindset, they might come in and teach something to the larger organization because fundamentally the student learned a great way to do it and couldn't imagine any other way to do something. I know that one of the questions we got asked as we were talking about doing this panel or this session was really from people who said, I see that there's value in student developers. Clearly both of you do, but I'm trying to start a program at my own organization. How can I advocate for my organization to do that? How can I prove the business case, particularly because students are several years outside of making purchasing decisions and things like that? What value can I show my organization that students will have?
Yeah, I can jump into it. So there's a lot though. It depends a lot on what your organization, what are you mentioned values, and I think it's a great word, right? Like when we talk about GitHub, we try to be the home for all developers, right? And that includes like students. Right now we are in the accessibility month, so making sure that our websites are accessible to everyone. So for us, one of our values is making sure that everyone feels that there's a space for them at GitHub and that they belong. Our space and kind of like the business value of GitHub Education is that we are the front door to GitHub for a lot of people. We are that first interaction that a lot of folks have with the platform. And we making sure that these first interaction, as Adam mentioned, right? Like that is something that they have like an aha moment where they can find the value of being part of the platform, where they can see themselves having a benefit from, is fundamental. And for us is making sure that we are able to align that moment as soon as possible so that people keep engaging with the platform. So when you think about like why ChatGPT became like such a big thing, is because you just write a sentence and you get a massive response of something super cool. And it's kind of like a very fast feedback loop. When you think about developer tools, it's so awful because first you need to learn how to code, you need to have like your environment, and then you need to do all the things. So depending a lot on the type of like business that you're building is how you can integrate with student developers. If your company is a developer first company, meaning that you're something like GitHub, or you're having like something like Twilio, where the developer is in some sort of way kind of like your client, that makes a lot of sense. If you are a developer plus company, meaning you are an airline and you have an API. I don't know exactly what, I mean, people can do fun stuff, and probably their value is like, what stuff can people create with these like API? So again, depending a lot on the organization that you come from. The other thing is that this is not a battle that you win really fast. I understand that short-term values, short-term goals do kind of like inflect a lot on how people take decisions. But what we've learned with GitHub is that, first of all, the long-term value of a student that is a user of the platform almost doubles compared to the one from a professional developer, just because you have them engaging with the platform years before they go out into the industry. So they are most likely gonna remain in your platform if you're able to bring them value from the start. The second thing is, I forgot what the second thing was, but essentially, the long-term value is very high. And for us, there's other things that we've learned through our developer programs. For example, products like GitHub Classroom were built by a student that then became part of our team. So through kind of like these iterations, for example, with MLH and seeing how students are using our technology, we're able to develop or find new products, or just like an immense amount of talent. The other thing is, especially, for example, in the case of GitHub Campus Experts, that is kind of like our community leaders and students that are building awesome communities. What we've learned is that when we really invest on these students, they are most likely ending up in decision-making roles after they have graduated, meaning that they might be taking decisions on the technology side of their companies that they end up working with, and having a positive and close connection to GitHub means that they're most likely willing to, in the future, use the platform, not so much as a student, but much more as an enterprise size, which I would say is where, like, if we want to talk like money and return of investment, is where like the real money is. So overall, I think the biggest value of working with students is, first of all, bringing awareness from an early stage and making sure that you have some sort of way to keeping them around, or building these relations with students, so that you don't have like this one-hit wonder type of thing where you organize a massive hackathon that is super expensive, and then people attend, they have great pizza, they do really cool stuff on a weekend, and then they fade away. But rather, you need to keep nurturing those relations.
Oh my goodness. So many nuggets of wisdom there. I think the one that I'm absolutely going to take away and start using all the time is that piece of information that you shared about the long-term value of a student developer being double that of a professional that starts engaging with you once they are a professional. That is a wild statistic. And it's really interesting also to hear you talk about that long-term slow burn of engaging continuously with developers. I think that that's something that we've seen at MLH when we've worked with a variety of partners. We've been around long enough that we've seen what happens when a partner continues to engage with students year over year, and there's a compounding value there. And it's really interesting to hear that called out, not just at Major League Hacking, but also you're seeing that at GitHub. And so having those smaller, longer term engagements rather than a big blowout is really useful. Adam, let me turn that question to you.
Yeah. Thinking in the long term was definitely where my head went immediately with that too. With the GitHub example there, imagine if GitHub had ignored this largest active user base just because they weren't spending a ton of money now. Then you might never have learned that detail about being worth double the amount. So I think looking at who is using your product now and not discounting any large group of it, I think shows that that's worthwhile. Anytime anyone asks about proving the value kind of on the like this quarter, this month, this day sort of level, regardless of what developer audience it is, I always have to take a step back and talk about that longer view, because very few companies, even developer first companies, are going to be able to measure that kind of value on a really short time frame, that someone comes in via search or ads or events or however they get there, and then they immediately sign up, and then they immediately start using. And like, think of all the things that have to happen there. There's a lot that has to happen there. And so often what I'll do in those circumstances is have a conversation about what some of those things are and what is that kind of next step. So is a sign up the sign of value? Like, can you say to someone that is worth something, right? Can you even go even a little step before that? Does someone go from whatever page they were on to the docs to explore? That's some engagement. That's some, like, that to me is at least the spark, the start of something that you can then point to. So I look for those smaller things that can start to prove this value, regardless of what that audience is. But I think if you're getting pushback on students, that's especially one is, okay, can we show that they use it? You know, maybe we can't show that they buy it yet, but can we show that they use it? And if you can, then you can point to examples like the GitHub one that we just heard, and say, all right, so here's our hypothesis. Let's measure their use, their engagement, and then can we start something going from there?
That's a great piece of advice, looking at those smaller things. And I think we've seen that bore out so often at Major League Hacking as well, seeing those little actions compounding into something much, much larger. And so being able to take advantage of that information, that data that these leaders like Wampa at GitHub have, and even perhaps us, to say, hey, those actions turn into this, is awesome. I want to make sure that we have the opportunity now to let all of the people here in this conversation ask some questions. So what I'm going to do is you can feel free to throw a question in the chat and I'll pose it to the panelists. Or if you feel comfortable with it, come off onto video and ask your question live. So I'll give everybody just a moment here, and feel free to do that. If you want me to call on you, you can raise your hand using that cool little Zoom raise hand thing. Paul, it's so wonderful to see you. Tell me, what can we help answer for you? What can these wonderful folks answer for you?
First of all, hello, everybody. I think I've worked with almost everybody that's on this call. It's getting close. I've got found out about this from a couple of colleagues on the Redis team, as a matter of fact, who are also on this call to learn and gain the knowledge from, a bunch of other smart people. And Nick, my question is more of a question statement, if I may. Do you recall what happened when we got involved with the GitHub student pack? Do you recall what happened at SendGrid?
I absolutely do. I think it was your first week on the first few months on the job, and we got in a lot of trouble from support because we just blew out our usage in such a major way that they were not ready for.
They thought we broke SendGrid. The corporate people or growth people, everyone came pointing at us, and I think I came pointing back at Nick, and it was probably one of the biggest engagement points for all of us. And for me, being early at the company, it put a point on the value of early engagement with students at all levels. So that was more of a fake question, veiled in a comment and veiled in a statement. But I just wanted to throw that out there that, you've got to engage early, and Juan, Paul, exactly. You've got to be consistent. It's got to be something that carries through, and people take that goodness, that give first goodness with them wherever they go. So I'll give it back to you. That was just more of a fake question.
Well, thank you for your fake question. I really appreciate it, and such a good data point.
I had moved on from SendGrid at that time and was at another company, Database as a Service, that also was listed in that initial pack, also was overwhelmed, but can say from that it was a great thing for a startup to have in a time where it's hard to get, whatever signups you can, being able to get that, being able to get feedback. And so that's one other upside to think of. I bet support got a lot of feedback, and in the best of ways at SendGrid from that onslaught as well.
Yeah, we've learned to be very careful with the student developer pack as well, because we want our partners to continue in business after they have joined the pack. And it's a great question, because we have a story of when something that some companies tend to do is to overexcite the audience. And what I mean by that is when you offer too much, and then sometimes it becomes like, you're bringing me because you're offering me only like free stuff. So a big example of that is something that we've learned with like GitHub graduation, which was by far one of our most successful campaigns, where we have thousands of students submitting a pull request into a single repository to add themselves to the yearbook. And initially, I think we were not aware of like how powerful we were with like the student developer pack in our newsletter. But as soon as we released that, we had so much engagement in a very small repository somewhere on GitHub that it really put a lot of our teams on stress, and also ourselves in stress, because someone had to review those pull requests. But when we have like partnerships like that coming, we're very careful as well. For example, Discord did reach out once, seeing if they would be a good fit for the student developer pack. And we had to postpone the conversation because we were not sure if we were going to be able to sustain the amount of like people that were going to start joining the student developer pack to get that benefit. So we through experience, we've learned a lot from like, it's good to not overexcite people. Otherwise, your company will have to pay those extra bills, and students will make the most out of those free tiers that you're giving them.
A very, very thoughtful answer. I see we are having the Kane pull us off stage here. As everybody had such wonderful questions, and our two wonderful speakers had so much to share. I want to give you both such a warm thank you, so much gratitude for all the information and knowledge that you shared. And offer to anybody on this call, if you have more questions about this, please reach out to us. Somebody on our team probably is already in touch with you. So please, if you have any questions, we want to help you. We've learned from Adam and his share knowledge, not features attitude. So we definitely want to help you with anything that you got. If you have more questions, we'll answer them over email. We can even connect you with answers from the panelists here. So thank you once again. Please take that survey that Fiona posted in chat to let us know how we're doing, and also tell us what you'd like to hear more of. We'll have more of these opportunities to hear from really, really incredibly smart people that like the ones here on this call. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.